Hello, this is Kale Varix, and I'm bringing you the second part of Harroway Connection. Enjoy.
Chapter 3, We Are on No Hurry. Jean followed the boy into the dusty elevator, its brass fittings worn but polished, the scent of old velvet lingering in the air. The moment the doors shut, she felt the subtle weight of movement, the slow descent of her stomach. But there were no buttons, no floor indicators. Just a key in the lock, turned with deliberate finality. Then with a soft chime the doors creaked open. The main floor of the Harroway looked different at night. The lighting was dim, casting everything in a warm, flickering glow. Candlelight danced across dark wood and polished silver. A long table stretched across the dining hall, set with china that looked as old as the building itself. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spices she didn't recognize, and something faintly sweet, almost like orchids in bloom. Guests and staff dined together, their laughter and conversation unnervingly comfortable, as if this was something that had been happening for centuries. Jean's ears picked up the First Lady before she saw her, a bright, rolling laugh, full of mirth but sharp at the edges, like she enjoyed the performance of being amused. She sat near the middle of the table, reclining like she owned the space. Her dress clung to her in rich scarlet satin, sleeves falling elegantly off her shoulders. She waved down a passing server with a flick of her wrist.
A Raleigh wine, the one from Sir Walter Raleigh's cellar. The last barrel, if you please.
Jean frowned. Surely that was a joke. Raleigh had been dead for centuries, but the First Lady's expression was lazy, expectant. When the server returned with a dust-covered bottle, she barely glanced at it. Instead, she reached into a small velvet pouch at her hip, retrieving a stack of casino chips. She paid in winnings right at the table. Jean watched as the server accepted them without hesitation. Not a blink, not a question. What kind of place is this? The gladiator, who drank to his own health. Further down the table, a man raised a glass. Jean didn't have to guess who he was. He looked like someone who belonged in the arena. Tall, broad, scarred, a thick headscarf draped over one side of his face, covering what should have been his left eye. A server poured deep red wine into his cup. He lifted it in a silent toast to himself.
To your performance today. To my health.
His voice was low, roughened like a man who had walked too long in the sun and fought too long in the dirt. Jean swallowed. No one asked what he had fought. No one asked if he had won. At the head of the table, Mr. Thorne regarded his plate with vague distaste. Jean's own meal was rich prime rib, roasted perfectly, served with delicate sprigs of rosemary and buttery rolls. It smelled divine. But Thorne's expression was indifferent. He lifted his fork, nudged the meat slightly, then sighed as though he had been served an obligation. He did not eat. Instead, he turned his gaze to Jean.
Your dress suits you.
His voice was low, thoughtful. Jean glanced down, suddenly aware of the fabric against her skin. The plantation belle dress, soft and golden in the candlelight.
It reminds me of better times. Tell me, Miss Patina, do you often long for things you cannot remember?
Jean's stomach tightened. She wasn't sure if it was the food, or if she should answer at all. Conversation had flowed smoothly, the murmur of voices filling the air until it didn't. There was no announcement, no signal. People simply began to rise, pushing their chairs back in near unison, as if something unseen had decided dinner was over. No one hurried. No one questioned it. The First Lady finished her glass with one last indulgent sip, setting it down with an amused smirk. The gladiator rose, stretching his shoulders, flexing the fingers of his unscarred hand. Thorne stood last. He lingered, waiting. Jean was still seated. His gaze settled on her, unreadable. Then softly, almost like a reminder or a promise.
We are in no hurry here, Miss Patina.
And with that, he turned and left. Jean sat in the heavy silence that followed, the candles flickering, the empty chair at the table still waiting. Jean handled more calls, and true to Thorne's words, they increased after dark. The switchboard hummed with activity, the voices on the line slipping in and out like guests at a grand, endless party. It was a rhythm, a pattern. She expected a revolving door of strangers, but instead, she found the same voices returning throughout the night. The guests of the Harroway were a talkative bunch. and soon they began speaking with her. Some were brief, an exchange of pleasantries before moving on, but others lingered. There was the astronomer, who spoke in a low, thoughtful voice, always asking to be connected to the observatory.
"The stars are restless tonight."
He said it once, as if that explained everything. There was the perfumer, who never requested a transfer, only whispered descriptions of scents John had never encountered.
"Have you ever smelled a garden at the end of the world, little operator? The last bloom before the dust takes it all?"
And then there was the gambler, a man who called the casino often, yet never spoke of his winnings.
Lady Luck has a sense of humor. I'd call her cruel, but I can't resist her company.
But the most talkative by far was Gladys. The Red Lady was always on the move, drifting between the Crimson Casino and wherever she chose to spend her winnings. Sometimes she called for the Grand Lounge, sometimes somewhere that sounded suspiciously like a bank. When Jean glanced at the directory, she saw it listed in looping script, "The Vault of Golden Hours." She never asked what that meant. Gladys never explained.
"Put me through, dear. Time is money, and I have plenty to spend."
Jean switched her through, beginning to understand that in the Harroway some things were simply taken as fact. Then, at midnight, the calls stopped, not one by one, not slowly. They simply ceased, all at once. The board dimmed, its lights flickering out in smooth succession, as if an unseen hand had powered it down. Jean reached out, hesitating. The switches were cool to the touch, lifeless. The work had ended, and she had not been the one to decide it. She stretched, rolling her shoulders. The work had not been difficult, barely more than listening, pressing buttons, making small talk, but she felt worn. Not tired, not sore, just used, as if something had brushed against her without her noticing, taken something small and subtle and irreplaceable. She shook the thought away. It was just exhaustion. She retired to her room. Chapter 4, The Poet in 717. Her suitcase was still where she had left it, unopened on the bed. She sat beside it, stretching out, expecting a lumpy, worn-down mattress. Instead, she sank in. The surface looked old, beaten, a battered feather bed, but it molded around her, soft and supporting, like memory foam. Jean exhaled, tension unwinding from her limbs. She had been so focused on the strange, the impossible, that she had not stopped to appreciate the simple things. A job, a place to stay, comfort. She might have fallen asleep right there, but something pulled her from the haze of exhaustion. A shift in the air. The room had been still and cool before, but now warmth curled through it, subtle, humid. The scent of violets drifted in, soft and sweet. Her favorite. She hesitated. Had the air always been this warm? Had the room always smelled like violets? The scent deepened as she stepped into the bathroom. She had been here all throughout the day, but now the light seemed softer. The space subtly changed. She turned toward the mirror, then stopped. A seam in the wall. Had that been there before? Her breath slowed. She had looked at this room earlier, used it, walked past this wall, but now she saw it. A faint outline, a crack in the smooth molding. Jean turned on the tap, washing her hands, grounding herself. When she looked up again, the seam was still there. She pressed her fingers to the surface. The texture was unbroken, smooth beneath her touch, until she applied pressure and something gave way. The faintest shift, a breath of movement. A handle carved into the design, subtle but undeniable. She hesitated, then slowly she pulled. The wall gave way effortlessly. Inside was an alcove, and within it a clawfoot tub, enormous and waiting. The water had already been drawn. Steam curled up from its surface, rich with warmth. Dried violet petals floated on top, drifting in lazy spirals. Built into the wall was a shelf lined with delicate glass bottles, filled with powders and creams, their labels faded with time. Jean reached for one at random, tilting the bottle, watching as fine flakes of soap slid into the water. A swirl of fragrance rose up, deeper, more intoxicating. She didn't question it. Not the door, not the tub, not the fact that the water was already perfect in temperature. She stripped off her clothes and stepped in. Heat wrapped around her, sinking into her muscles, pressing against the edges of her exhaustion. She exhaled slowly, tilting her head back, letting herself relax for the first time since she had arrived. Then a new scent, not violets, not perfume, but something richer, more grounded, smoky, citrus, warm oak, and aged fire. Her eyes flickered open. A glass sat at the edge of the tub, balanced precariously, yet perfectly. She stilled. Had she brought it in? No, she hadn't. It hadn't been there before. Her fingers hovered over it, uncertain. The scent curled into her nose, smoky, citrusy, layered. If Brad had been cheap tequila in a plastic bottle, then this was his sophisticated, cigar-smoking millionaire brother. Not that he had one of those. She lifted the glass, hesitated a moment longer, then took a sip. It was nothing like the sweet margaritas she had indulged in before. It was bold, bitter, loud. It slid down her throat like a campfire at midnight, warm and steady, filling her from the inside out. Her muscles relaxed further, her body sinking deeper into the water, into the heat, into the scent. This hotel gig really did have some perks. She closed her eyes, drifting, not thinking, not questioning, just sinking deeper and deeper into the comfort the Harroway provided. Jean awoke to a phone ringing. She looked for her cell, but remembered she'd left it dead on the nightstand. That was odd in itself, since she hadn't used it all day. She stirred, her limbs heavy, warm, boneless. The bath water still cradled her, impossibly perfect, the heat clinging to her skin like an embrace. She had no idea how long she'd been there. She stretched, sighing, drunk on warmth, on the faint smoky burn lingering in her throat. The mezcal had settled into her bones, not in an unpleasant way. It felt right, like her body no longer belonged entirely to her, but to something softer, more fluid. The ringing repeated. Jean blinked, then reached lazily for the towel, wrapping it around herself. She was in no hurry to answer the phone, as it seemed intent on ringing forever. She'd answered the blasted thing all day.
Hello? This is the operator?
The voice that spoke on the other end was unfamiliar, not one of the guests that had called her, male, deep and pleasant.
To see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower.
Jean blinked, warmth still heavy in her limbs from the bath. Auguries of innocence. Her lips parted, but it took an extra beat for her mind to catch up.
Who quotes William Blake after midnight, and who is this?
She glanced at the switchboard, and froze. The brass plaque beneath the illuminated wire gleamed softly. Room 717. Her breath hitched. The voice was different, no reverb, no unsettling curling smoothness. A trick? The pause on the other end stretched. Then at last the man spoke again.
What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name would be Tom.
Jean exhaled slowly, a bemused smile tugging at her lips.
Well, you're an odd one, Tom, but you have good taste.
She swirled the mezcal in her glass, the smoky scent curling warm and heady in her lungs.
I used to teach English once. Bet you didn't know that.
A pause. Then, with deliberate weight, he spoke again.
Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow.
Jean's smile faded. That was too close. The mezcal's haze made it easy to dismiss, but a thread of unease tightened in her chest. A shadow had fallen over her teaching. Did he know something? She leaned forward, her voice quieter now.
Why do you speak this way? I get that you're well-read, but can't you just say what you mean?
A pause, longer this time, as if dragging the words out was a struggle. Then, at last,
the soul once wrapped in shining mist, of words too bright to hold, now treads in echoes, borrowing light, from voices far too old.
Jean frowned. That wasn't quite Longfellow. She let the thought settle, searching for the missing piece.
Is that a no?
The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven.
That didn't really answer her question, but it also did. He wasn't just quoting, he was speaking the only way he could. She glanced down and found the mezcal still in her other hand. She took another sip. The dizziness was pleasant, the heat wrapping around her like a second bath. The room was surprisingly comfortable in her towel. Maybe too comfortable.
Well, why did you call me then?
No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main.
Jean hummed into her glass.
So you're lonely?
There was a pause, as if the words had to be pulled from someplace deep and reluctant. Then, carefully,
Certainly, no man is so foolish as to prefer solitude, but a crowd is not company, and faces are a gallery of pictures.
Jean blinked slowly, the mezcal humming through her veins.
So people don't feel real to you?
A longer silence, then almost hoarse.
They are shadows on the wall.
A shiver traced her spine, but she said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. Then, just as he started to speak, the line cut out. With that rather unsettling conversation, she pulled on some bedclothes and went to bed. The comfort wrapped her, and she found herself sinking into sleep.
Well, that's been it for Harroway Connection Part 2. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you on the next one. Well, that's been it for Harroway Connection Part 2. Hope you enjoyed it, and see you on the next one.